It's a MapReduce-based workflow management system that we developed in Innsbruck. So we heard yesterday that next generation sequencing enables us to sequence the whole genome at low cost and at high scale. It means one experiment produces gigabytes of data. So the problem we have now is not the data generation, so the data generation is not the bottleneck anymore, but our problem now is the data processing. So one single workstation is not sufficient to analyze our big data that we derive from the NGS devices, and for medium or small sized institutes, supercomputers are often too expensive. So one solution for that problem is commodity computing. That means we are using a large number of low budget components, we connect them together, and then we use this infrastructure to analyze our data in parallel. And with MapReduce, we have a parallelization framework that was developed especially for that kind of computer hardware, computer infrastructure, and was developed by Google in 2004 and enables us to analyze large data sets. So the user, the developer, has to write only a map and a reuse function, and the framework itself takes care about fault tolerance, data distribution, and load balancing. And a batch Hadoop is the most used open source implementation of the MapReduce framework. So on this slide, in this table, you see a lot of MapReduce applications in the field of bioinformatics. We have here some libraries, for example, HadoopAmp or SecPic, which are using MapReduce Hadoop to analyze NGS data. We have also some specific tools that are used to align different reads against the reference, and we have also some tools for RNA analysis. But the problem with all the tools here is that they are available only on a per tool basis. It means in our case, in our analysis, we need a pipeline. We need to connect different tools together in order to analyze our data. But the problem with the available MapReduce applications is that they cover only one aspect of these large pipelines. And the third point is that for biologists, for scientists without background in computer science, MapReduce is often very hard to use. And some available popular workflow systems, for example Galaxy or Taverna, cover this aspect only for traditional tools, so they enable this level of abstraction, but they don't support MapReduce out of the box. So what is missing? Missing is a system which enables us to building MapReduce workflows that we can then use and execute in order to analyze our data. And exactly for that reason, we developed in Innsbruck in 2010 CloudGene, and it's a system to execute MapReduce programs graphically, and then we can combine choose individual programs to a workflow for the data analysis. And so we have one platform with many programs, and the idea was that it should be very easy to integrate existing MapReduce programs in our system, and that we have a basis for new implementations, for new developments. And so it's also possible to integrate new MapReduce programs in a very, very easy and straightforward way. Moreover, it's possible to create workflows, and we are not limited to MapReduce or, for example, a batch pick. We can also integrate R scripts for report generation and any other Unix command line program. And the main advantage of CloudGene is that all this functionality runs in your browser in form of a web application. So to visualize the architecture, we have here our MapReduce workflow manager, and on the top of it we have different bioinformatic workflows. But these workflows requires a compatible cluster to execute. And so, for example, for small, medium-sized research institutes, they can hardly afford own clusters, and cloud computing is a possible solution that enables us to rent computer hardware in form of virtual machines from different providers, for example, Amazon. And so, to solve this problem, we developed a second module, the CloudGene cluster module, which is an infrastructure manager and which enables to create a cluster in the cloud, in our example, in the Amazon cloud. And both modules together form the CloudGene system. So on this slide you see the advantages of CloudGene compared to the traditional, the manual approach. So on the left side we see the manual approach. So when we analyze our data in the Amazon cloud, we have to create manually the cluster, we have to install Hadoop, we have to configure the software, the libraries and so on. Then we have to transfer the data from the local machine, from our cluster, to the remote cluster. Then we have to import the data in the HDFS file system, we have to submit it to the job, we have to export the data, and then we have to copy the results back to our machine. And when we are using CloudGene, then we can see the workflow is very simple. We have this CloudGene cluster module, which enables us to create a cluster. Then we have different results, which help to import the data from different sources in the HDFS system, file system. Then we have some graphical user interface to submit the job, to monitor the progress of the job. And then finally, we can download the results directly to the local machine. On this slide, you see a very raw picture of the architecture. So the core of CloudGene is its workflow execution engine. This engine communicates with the Hadoop cluster, and it enables us to submit jobs to the MapReduce cluster. And then we have here this workflow manager, which is responsible to monitor the workflows, and we can obtain different status updates and details about our running jobs. And then we have here the data manager, which enables us to import and export data to the HDFS file system. And the client here and the server communicate to a REST API, and the client in our case is a web application. So when we developed CloudGene, we had two aims in mind. First, it should be possible to integrate existing new algorithms in a very, very straightforward way. And the second aim was to integrate the existing MapReduce applications and without adaptation, source code, and so on. And so for that reason, CloudGene uses its own workflow language. This workflow language is called the workflow definition language, and it's a formal description of the task and the different workflow steps, and it's property-based and uses the YAML syntax. It's very human readable, so it's very easy to write these definition language files. And as mentioned before, it supports different software components. We are not limited to MapReduce, so we can use any other Unix command line program. And in the new version, we have also some basic workflow control patterns implemented, so we can use loops and conditions to form our workflow in a more dynamic way. Here on this slide, you see a simple example of such a workflow definition language manifest file. We have here on the top of the file, we have some header with some meta informations, and then we can define here our input data sets or input values and our outputs. The inputs are set then by the user through the web interface, and the outputs are created by one or two tasks and can be either intermediate or persistent results. And then we can use here these input and these output variables, and then we can form here the command line parameters, which are then used to execute this jar file in order to submit our job to the cluster. And then based on this manifest file, CloudGene automatically creates the user interface. In this example, we have some more input parameters, so we can, in this example, select the reference genome, some reads from the HDFS file system, then we can set some parameters for this alignment algorithm. And then when the user clicks on finish, then the workflow execution engine comes into the play, and we have here the user input, we have our manifest file which defines the steps of the workflow, and then based on these both inputs, we create a dependency graph, and then we optimize this dependency graph in order to minimize the execution time. So in the next versions we also plan to implement some caching that we need to execute only those tasks which are new, where we have new input data or we have different parameters in order to save time. And then in the last step, the optimized schedule, the optimized plan is submitted to the Hadoop cluster. And then the user has the possibility to monitor the progress of this workflow. So for example, here we see some running workflow. Here we have some progress bar of the map and the reduce phase. And so the user is able to get some feeling about the progress of the execution. And here on the right side, we have our HDFS workspace. And this workspace helps to manage the data on the HDFS file system. We can create new folders, we can delete files, you have the possibility to import data from different sources, for example from S3 buckets, from Amazon, or from HTTP, or from SFTP, and so on. And so we can import the data to the cluster, which can then be used in the workflow. And then when the job is finished, then we notify the user by email, and then have the possibility to download here the result files of the workflow, and here's also a possibility to see which parameters were used for this experiment in order to improve the reproducibility and the parameter tracking. As mentioned before, we are not limited to a batch Hadoop, MapReduce, or PIC, or so on. We also implemented our R Markdown module, and R Markdown is a good solution to generate HTML reports, so we can create reports with charts, statistics, and so on, and it's very easy to use. And the second possibility is to use any Unix command line program, and in this case CloudGene helps you by exporting automatically HDFS files from the HDFS file system to the POSIX file system, so there is no manual file staging needed. And all this has the advantage that we can create hybrid workflows, so we can mix up different technologies in order to analyze our data in a very, very efficient way. So some other features of CloudGene, so we have implemented some authentication, some user management, we have this parameter tracking, and we have, as I showed you before, this HDFS workspace, so it hides the HDFS file system by the end user, and we support different data sources which can be used to import the data to your HDFS file system, and the aim is to facilitate the management on the data sets on the cluster. Before I'm at the end of my task, give you some short preview about the new version of CloudGene, the CloudGene 2, and there the most difference is the interface. So we developed a new interface especially for public web services, and the idea is that we can use the same manifest file but with a different interface which provides user registration, different intelligent queuing, user notification. We have also some administration panel where we can block users, where we can get the feeling about our web service. And two examples which are used in CloudGene 2 are the importation server and the deny server, which were presented by Sebastian yesterday, and they are using our new web interface and our public available web services. And the second point is that we want to turn CloudGene into a more generic data analysis platform by integrating additional data processing models, because at the moment we are using Hadoop 1, so we are limited to MapReduce. So the next step is, with the new Hadoop version and the new YARN architecture, Hadoop 2 is not limited to MapReduce. It supports also some in-memory data processing models, some for graph databases and so on. And so we hope that when we change to CloudGene to Hadoop 2, then we can turn CloudGene into a more generic data analysis platform that is not limited to MapReduce. So I'm at the end of my presentation. So if you like CloudGene, or if you're interested in CloudGene, you'll find here the website with some information. And we have also created for this workshop here a virtual machine which can be downloaded here. And so if you attend the tutorial this afternoon, you can download the virtual machine, and then we can show you how we are using CloudGene in our analysis of NGS data. And we have also some documents to get you a smooth start in CloudGene. So thank you very much for your attention.
Lukas, yes, yeah. 2 questions. See a pattern here. Yes.
If you go back to the slide which have the block diagram of the client and server and Hadoop cluster.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
This one.
Yes, this one. Here you have the workflow engine on the server,
Yes.
and you have the Hadoop cluster. Do they share the file system?
So they run on the same machine. So the server is running on the name node of the Hadoop cluster.
Okay.
And then you can use the same distributed file system as the Hadoop
So the
cluster.
same node, the name node of Hadoop you use as an interface to the client as well.
Exactly.
Okay, but here when you use MapReduce here, the WDL is not limited to MapReduce. So is the user is forced to use this programming model, the key value thing in his program, or he just used WDL and then you convert it to MapReduce stuff in the execution side?
So you can use this workflow engine also without MapReduce. So you can use only your normal command line programs, or you can integrate MapReduce programs. And when you integrate MapReduce programs, then the server has to run on a Hadoop cluster. That's the only thing. So you can also run this on some other machine, but then you don't have this MapReduce.
You don't have this parallelism if you don't
Exactly.
write it in. Yeah.
Okay, so Seshan, last question.
Is there any, because this workflow, there are lots of workflow systems coming up, is there any standard workflow definition language so that otherwise we will lock in into
Yeah.
one single system? Is there anything like that?
So for scientific workflows, I think there is no standard. I know only for the business processing model community there are some very nice standards, but in the scientific workflow community it's sometimes a little bit hard because everyone creates his own system and creates his own language, and so there is no standard.
Yeah, I think this came up in the discussions yesterday that would be a really nice thing to construct some sort of harmonized, high-level, agreed upon definition of workflows. But we all agree that would be a difficult thing to do, but an honorable thing to also do. Yeah. Okay. Very, very last.
I'm just commenting on this that there is. I'm always talking about flow-based programming, but there they are actually there's coming up a kind of a format that might become a bit of standard. So one might be interested to look at that.
Which one, what's the name of that?
I can
You can
show you.
yeah. Talk to Samuel offline after that. So thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Lukas. We'll move on to our next.